Today's guest on the Winning Teams podcast is Dr. Steven Rogelberg. Dr. Steven is the professor of organizational science, management, and psychology. And he also, in recent times, won the Humboldt Prize, which is one of the highest awards that you can get in the whole scientific world. He's also the author of the book, The Surprise Science of Meetings, How You Can Lead Your Team to Peak Performance. And that's really the subject of the interview that we do with Steven, who is just a great communicator. The book is a fantastic book. I would highly recommend it to anybody who is leading a team or running meetings to actually do that. But what we're going to dive into, some things we're going to dive into during the interview is how to run really effective meetings. And Steven has not just got kind of opinions, it's based on science and what he's discovered over 20 years of research in that space. But also how you can be a brilliant facilitator. And facilitation is a very specific skill. And I think that the way Steven actually explains facilitation and the facilitating of meetings is one of the best I've ever heard. So it's really worth listening in for that alone. And also in this day where we're having so many virtual meetings and all the team meetings, how leaders can facilitate meetings with their teams to really have a very, very positive impact. So lots of really good stuff, and I encourage you to really listen in, take notes, and also go to the resources that Steven talks about during the meeting, and which will also be in the show notes. If you want to get other great content, other great interviews, great guests, we've got some fantastic ones, go on the podcast, www.johnmurphyinternational.com, and you can find them all there. But in the meantime, sit back and listen to the very esteemed Steven Rogelberg. Steven, you're very welcome to the Winning Teams podcast. I really appreciate you being here with me and to share your knowledge with all of the listeners.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
You've got a very, very, a very impressive background. You're a professor of organizational science management, and you've also been the winner of the Humboldt Prize, which is quite an achievement in the scientific world. And but what do you want to focus on the book that you published, The Surprise Science of Meetings, where the Washington Post said that it's one of the top 10 leadership books in 2019, which I think is a great accolade, particularly it's a book about meetings, and it shows where the importance of that. And I love the piece in that you said that, and I may have got this slightly wrong, but if I die, I hope it will be during a staff meeting, as the transition will be subtle. I love that. I will steal that, but I will credit you with it. But maybe just explain, why is it, the other stat that you have was 72% of senior managers say meetings are unproductive, but they're the ones that call them.
Yeah.
What is that all about?
Yeah. So thank you for that intro. And I feel very, very grateful. The book basically is a culmination of 20 years plus of research on meetings. And so I released it, and frankly, I didn't know if anyone would read this book because it's about meetings, and it's also unabashedly about science. And I was absolutely shocked to see the reaction, whether it's Washington Post, Business Insider, Forbes magazine. And for someone like myself, who's just a meeting scientist, I'm not looking to do my next book. This was the book I wanted to write. It really speaks to the appetite people have to truly want to solve this meetings problem, but leverage evidence, right? Because clearly people aren't getting it right. Their intuition is not correct, because if it was correct, we wouldn't have this problem. And so this book lays out a bunch of evidence-based practices that can turn the dial. And it's interesting, the last part of your question, you mentioned how 72% of senior managers say that meetings are unproductive and they call the most. Well, it really speaks to the fact that there's this blind spot that seems to exist. Meeting leaders think they are better at running meetings than anyone else thinks. And we actually collected data on this. We survey people as they end a meeting and we say, hey, what did you think of the meeting? And invariably, one person's ratings are higher than everyone else's, the meeting leader.
Yeah.
So we have this inflated self-perception is driven by the fact that when we talk a lot, we think that's a good exchange, and meeting leaders tend to talk a lot. So this blind spot plays into this bad cycle on meetings.
Yeah, I want to come on to talking about, because in the world that we're in right now, where everybody is working remotely, and that creates a different dynamic. But I want to go back to some of the things you're talking about in the book, and I just think there's wonder. I mean, it's really magic in there for leaders and running meetings, because as you say, I mean, we have to have meetings because it's a way of actually communicating, engaging, and doing all that sort of stuff. But it's actually about having good ones. But a couple of things you say there is that you talk about being a steward of other people's times, which, I like that as a kind of a thought, but I also recognize that it's a big shift in mindset.
It is. The best meeting leaders have something in common, and what they have in common is that mindset. Right? So think about that mindset of being a good steward of others' time. Once you have that mindset, well, you don't want your meetings to be part of the problem, right? You want your meetings to be the exception. You start making choices. You become intentional. You start thinking through the meeting process. And interestingly, we do this all the time when it comes to meeting with important customers, meeting with board members, right? We would never want them to leave the meeting saying that was a waste. So we give it thought. And that thought could just be 30 seconds to a minute, right? In many regards, it's what you do every time you do an interview, right? Before you start, you are absolutely in the mindset of being a good steward of others' time. And it didn't take you long, but it's just a mindset. And so really, when you think about the pathway to being a good meeting leader, it starts with that mindset. Then you start making choices, and those choices could be around the size of the meeting, how to structure the agenda, the processes, how to end the meeting. All those are part of the journey then.
And one of the things you talk about in agenda, because for many people they say, okay, well, the secret to a successful meeting is one of the secrets is to have a really good agenda. But you've got a different take on that. You're saying it shouldn't be an agenda that this is what I want to talk about, that's what I want to talk about, that's what I want to talk about. You say it should be set as a set of questions. Can you explain that and just elaborate on that? Because I thought that was great.
Thank you. So first of all, the research on agendas is not so great. Having an agenda in itself does not predict meeting effectiveness. And if you step back and think about it, it's not a surprise, right? What matters more is what's on the agenda. What matters more is it relevant to people? And what matters even more is how did you facilitate the meeting? So having an agenda is, and as you saw in the book, I call it a hollow crutch, because people think just by having this agenda, click, I'm a good leader. And that's just not true. So one of the things I talk about also in the book, and is what you're referring to. So most agendas that are created are identified as a set of topics to be discussed in a meeting. And what I want to challenge meeting leaders to do is to structure their agendas as a set of questions to be answered. And setting your agenda as a set of questions to be answered creates a very different mindset, right? You have to think differently. What are you truly trying to achieve, right? You're answering these questions. You have a better sense of who to invite to the meeting, right? Because they're relevant to the questions. And you know if the meeting has been successful, right? The questions have been answered. So I like this as a technique for meeting leaders to be more disciplined in their approach. And I think it really connects and resonates with people. It's particularly effective, I believe, right now. Remote meetings tend to lack focus. And by structuring it as a set of questions, I think you are able to regain some of the focus.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because when you were talking about, one of the things that struck me about it, and again, there's a touch of semantics about this, but if I'm the leader and I'm setting the agenda, it has a connotation that I'm actually setting the agenda. I have decided what we're actually going to talk about. I have decided I'm actually just going to project my agenda and what I want onto the meeting. It's not really an agenda. Whereas the other way is that no, we're actually open to discussion. So it's a much cleaner way of actually having a meeting. But can you talk to you used the word there, facilitate the meeting, And that's a very particular skill. When
Yeah,
you're talking about facilitating a meeting, what do you mean by that?
sure. So basically, why people find meetings so frustrating is that you are relinquishing control, right? You are giving up personal power and you're giving it to the meeting leader.
Hmm.
And meetings are inherently collective experiences, and they have tons of different dynamics. And these dynamics can be both positive and they can be negative. People interrupting one another is negative. People not listening is negative. There's lots of people, an individual just running on and talking and talking and talking is another example of a negative. So when you think about the dynamics of a meeting, who's responsible for kind of managing those dynamics? Well, follow the power. Who has the power? And the power is in that leader's hands. The leader is responsible for making sure the dynamics are constructive and positive. Again, it goes back to that being a good steward of others' time. And so too many leaders go into meetings wanting to just dominate and to express their own views. And as a result, they don't take this responsibility of being a facilitator as even something on their plate. But you called this collective gathering, right? We know that by engaging multiple people in a process, we're able to derive better decisions. We know by engaging multiple people in the process, we're able to capitalize on more perspectives and unique insights. So the promise of a meeting is in bringing out these talents in the attendees. So a meeting leader just has to be not only about bringing themselves to the meeting, but also in just helping manage these dynamics, right? So when they see a meeting going astray, right, they're on that. That's their job. If they see someone just rambling and talking, that's on them to address it in some fashion, right? So they are just plugged into these communication patterns. That's a key role for them.
That's a great explanation of facilitation. Oh, I do want to get on to kind of the current environment and meetings because it does have a somewhat different dynamic. But I also want you to explain, you talk about kind of separation, standing and shrinking the time. Can you maybe just elaborate on that? Because I thought that was really good. The points you were making and very helpful. It's things that people can actually go away from this conversation and do something with.
Right. So I'll focus on just two of those for time and relevance to the remote meeting context. So the shrinking. This is the idea that meeting quality and effectiveness decreases the more people we have in the meeting. And with remote meetings, it's a really pretty precipitous drop. So we want to manage size actively. And again, with remote meetings, we can do this really readily because we can record meetings with a click of a button. It's so simple. So for those people who are not core to the meeting, right, these secondary individuals, let's give them a break. Let's tell them that, hey, we're going to give you the recording. But here's the important add-on. We give them the recording and we tell them that, hey, if you want to attend future meetings, you're more than welcome. But I didn't think it was all that relevant to you and I wanted to honor your time. So you have to give people the invitation because otherwise you risk people being feeling marginalized. So recordings are a fantastic option in remote meetings. People listen to them in twice the speed. And also importantly, they listen to them when it's convenient, right? So they can keep in their workflow, right? And they're not constantly interrupted. Yeah. So that's this notion of shrink. So there's standing, shrink. What was the third?
Separation.
Okay. Thank you for, it's funny, when I do these various interviews, I realize that basically everyone else has read my content much more recently than I have. Right. I haven't read my book for over a year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So anyways, what we find is that meetings are typically experienced as interruptions. And people respond negatively to interruptions, right? It upsets us. It puts us in a bad mood. And so the principle of separation is really about trying to help bridge what people were previously doing with the meeting itself. And one of the things that a meeting leader can do is start their meetings well. start their meetings with some enthusiasm, just like you do with your podcast, right? It's trying to help the listener create separation. So expressing gratitude and appreciation, these are really important concepts that just help people make this separation. So starting your meeting well is incredibly important. And I'll add this one other bit to it that I think is pretty fascinating. So the research shows that the mood in a meeting is very predictive of creativity. It's very predictive of people listening to one another. So to the extent that we can create a positive mood state, the better. Well, the best predictor of the mood state in a meeting is the leader's mood state. So when the meeting leader also puts themselves into a good state of mind and starts the meeting in that manner, it's paving the way for a much more constructive and healthy discourse.
Okay. That leads me into a question. I'm conscious of the time, but it does lead me into a question, because one of the challenges that in this day, because we're all used to kind of using Zoom and WebEx and all that sort of stuff, on an occasional basis, but we also would normally have a lot of face-to-face meetings. And one of the things that leaders are being challenged with is, how do I keep my team engaged when all the communication is now virtual? Yeah. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. So, basically, I think what people are looking for is touch points. And so leaders could be having one-on-ones with their people, but keep them short, right? People have low attention spans right now. They're busy, they're distracted, especially people with young kids at home. So have quick check-ins with people. You have 5-minute weekly check-ins with your people. That's a great technique. Then for your meetings themselves, make them powerful and interesting and engaging. Leverage a variety of different approaches in your remote meetings. So for example, go as video-based as you can. There's some wonderful apps out there that allow people, for example, to vote. There's even a great approach where you leverage silence in your remote meetings. And let me share that with your audience, because I think they might find it interesting. Basically, you bring together your team. And then you say, here are the key things that we have to discuss, or key questions that we have to answer. Then you put a link to a Google Doc in the chat room, or you shoot it out via email. Then the meeting leader shares that document. Everyone is on their computer. They see the prompts and they start answering those prompts. They start commenting upon each other's ideas. And you have this incredibly vibrant discussion, all taking place in writing. The meeting leader is then able to see it, but everyone is able to touch it, right? You don't have any of these communication log jams occurring. So you do that for 15, 20 minutes. The leader can take a look, see, hey, here are the themes that are emerging. Here are the takeaways. Maybe we need to then vote on something, whatever it happens to be. But I like a meeting leader trying to bring some creativity and some new approaches to these remote meetings.
That's brilliant. I love that. And I know exactly when I'm going to use that. It will be next week when I'm actually running a webinar for a group. Stephen, this has been fantastic. And I do want to be, a steward of your time and what we agreed in terms of time. But before we wrap up and you tell people how they can get in touch with you, all of which will be in the show notes as well. But a book other than your own that's had an impact upon you, what one is it and why?
Okay. So I have one that I think it actually fits really well with the times, and it's a classic. It's called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. And it's an old book. I think it might even be 100 years old at this point, by Dale Carnegie. Wow. And it's a very dated, sexist, it's a book of the times where men dominated the environment. But it was the insights and thoughts, once you remove the other crap, the other bad stuff, are really interesting. He had just some really neat perspectives on how to deal with stressors. And I just found it interesting and innovative. So that's a book that I would recommend.
Brilliant. That's an interesting one to actually go and add to the pile. The other one is daily rituals. Do you have any, and are you happy to share them?
Besides always having a nice cup of tea in the morning, some of my daily rituals have been thrown away. So I enjoy sports, and the world of sports has come to a halt. So I don't get to engage in my reading of sports in the morning. But I probably say my daily ritual, is having a good stretch to start the day.
Get you going.
Gets me going.
Absolutely. Stephen, where can people get in touch with you? I said it'll be in the show notes, but if they're listening, they can go there now. How do they get connected to you?
Yeah, so I'd love for people to come to my website. It's stevenrogelberg.com, stevenrogelberg.com, or you can go to the website, thesurprisingscience.com. It's worth going. I have a lot of resources on there for folks on how to make their meetings better, including remote meetings. You can also find links to my book. So yeah, definitely, I hope folks will check it out.
Well, I would definitely recommend, because having looked at your website, there is a ton of resources on the website. So it is well worth going for. And the book is a great read. So congratulations, you deserve the success. And thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.